Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m., Wednesday, the 27th of November, and you're watching episode 153 of Regional Rap. Regional Rap providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Victoria, the Petri dish for Australian atavism, is my guest, Dr. David Barton. David began his career as a youth worker in inner city Melbourne, working with those released early from the Tarana facility. In 1983, he relocated to Alice Springs as a council's first youth worker, where he developed a range of programs for young people, including some initiative programs for Aboriginal young. By the mid-90s, David had taken up position in Ballarat as a regional youth worker affairs consultant, which encompassed a good deal of community development work. By the late 90s, he secured a position at the Attorney General's Department in Canberra. David later established his own business as a researcher and consultant lobbyist at Parliament House. Moving back to Melbourne in 2000, David worked as the CEO of a large statewide community-based organisation, continued his consultancy and lobbying work with the Victorian Parliament. In 2006, David moved to Marysville to open an antiques and collectible shop, and at the same time become the inaugural president of the new Marysville and District Chamber of Commerce. Unfortunately, he lost everything in the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires. David was awarded bravery medals and service commendations for his life-saving actions with the State Emergency Service during and after Black Saturday. He has given many presentations to school groups and conferences regarding the community and personal impact of the 2009 bushfires. Welcome, David.
Hello, Bill.
Well, it's good to have you here. Obviously, couldn't you hold down a job? You just kept going around Australia. But
Yes, can't
you're stuck in the
can't.
same field, so it's an interesting sort of conversation these days in regards to our youth situation, both with the Indigenous and some of our ethnic groups, as well as those others in poor socio-economic conditions. Your experience goes back a long time. But do you think we need more help now than we ever did? Because I don't see things have got any better in the youth integration field in regards to those people in difficult circumstances.
Well, I think that things have certainly got much worse, really. There was always a bit of an argument about which period of history it was worse to live in, and whether young people today have got it any more difficult than what young people had, say, when they had to go off and fight in the First World War. So I guess for every generation there are lots of different challenges. But I think the biggest challenge that our young people feel today are being force-fed propaganda in the education department and coming to the wrong conclusions about what's really happening in the world. If you look at, for instance, this latest protest in Newcastle with all the young people out there on their boats trying to block the shipment of coal out of Australia, it simply says to me that these people don't understand the way that the world works, and if they're being indoctrinated into this so-called climate crisis, is it any wonder that they're lost and don't know where the world is going?
But I suppose the other thing is too, the expectations are a lot different. I mean, when I was a kid, we were entertained with go and getting a stick and throwing it, or going down the local road a bit, and we'd run into a paddock, and sometimes we'd get up and go and get mushrooms. It was mushroom things all, and the trips to school. Well, we used to get to school, well before the bell and muck around and kick the ball, and then usually coming home was took us about 3 or 4 times longer because we sort of diverted between school and going home because there was not mischief to get up to, but there were things to entertain ourselves, sort of thing. So, do you think a lot of it's to do with people's expectations or the expectations of others on people?
Well, I think young people are being corralled into a smaller and smaller square. It doesn't seem that long ago that you were able to take your 22 rifle with you on the bus and catch the bus out of town and go rabbit shooting and come back to town again with your 22 and a handful of rabbits for the family pot. Now, those days are long, long gone. And we see now with the size of people's houses, they've got no backyard or side yard or even front yard in them at all. And young people are just squashed into a room where they're welded onto their iPads or their iPhones or whatever. And that the whole world has completely changed. It's just all digitally driven, and people are welded to their screens. And I think that that's really changed the world a great deal for young people.
Yeah, but what surprises me is we're just going, this is something that's evolved slowly in Australia, but I mean, there's a lot of other countries with much higher population densities than that, in the United States and throughout Europe and that. So it was going to come eventually, but we've never seemed to be prepared for anything that comes upon us. We've always, it just amazed me. Although other countries have experienced things previously, we seem to always be aghast when the situation hits us. Why do you think we're so badly prepared in regards to so many matters in regards to dealing with just normal life these days?
Well, it certainly seems to be a problem with planning for the future. And one of the crazy things that Australia seems to do is constantly copy the bad ideas from overseas. So if you look at, say, for example, immigration that's occurring in the UK and in Europe at the moment, it's become perfectly obvious what the problems are there with immigration and bringing into your country lots and lots of people that don't actually share your own values, and then those people start increasing in number and start making demands that the host country actually changes their values. Now, this is the sort of thing that's exactly starting to happen in Australia, and we've been seeing this with all the Palestinian protests. And no good can come of it. So you wonder why Australia would continue to do such things as bring in the thousands of refugees from Gaza when basically every other country in the world has refused to take them. I don't know why we keep making these mistakes, and we'll probably hear this over and over again tonight. But you've got to wonder whether the people in control that are supposed to be in charge and making all the plans, whether they're just stupid or whether this stuff is actually deliberate. And I think that's the big question.
Yeah, well, we'll move on to the topic in regards to the legislation that's coming through right across Australia to lock up more and more land and deny us access to um, things that we've long held basically as a right and expectation that not only what we did is going to be available for future generations, access to parks and hills and outside adventure sort of thing. But it's not only just recreational; it's also seemingly a effort to stop development, industry, primary industries, um, in regards to everything outside the capital cities. So we'll touch on that a little bit later, but maybe I'm sort of interested in regards to Marysville and your experience in Marysville. Um, Obviously, I was in Victoria at the time, and we were frequent, no, originally frequent visitors up to the Yarra Valley and beyond, up to Lake Eildon. So we went to Marysville several times before the bushfires. Often took the children up there just to have a look around, and I mean, there's plenty of good scenery in the whole area and that. Um, it, the layout and that didn't overly strike me as sort of worrisome that it would get basically burned to the ground. But obviously, I know nothing about bushfires and what their potential is. But to me, we've had 100 years experience in Australia with bushfires and that. Did no one see the writing on the wall that what possibly could happen in those sort of townships? I mean, I understand what happened in King Valley and things like that because people were living amongst the trees basically. But I remember that Saturday, the fires had started in the early afternoon. They were on the other side of the Calder Highway, I think, when they started and rushed towards King Valley and out that way. And everyone, it was on the news throughout the afternoon and into the evening, but no one really had a clue that next morning we'd wake up and that would be the first time we've been advised or acknowledged the fact that a whole township had been wiped out.
Yes, look, in answer to your earlier question about the parks, and I know we'll move on to that shortly, but there's simply one word answer to that, and that's socialism, but we'll come back to that. In relation to the Marysville situation, I guess there were a lot of people over the years who were warning about what the problems were, but when you've also got a situation where councils refuse to let people clear around their properties. They refuse to let them cut down trees. And even despite the fact that people have been wanting to clear around their properties, there were so many prohibitions in place that prevented them from doing that. And to some extent, there still are today. Places like Marysville were just a disaster waiting to happen. Yeah, there were two fires, of course, that were the worst ones on Black Saturday. One started near Kilmore, which is just on the other side of the Hume Highway. The Calder Highway is a little bit further over. And that actually roared through to King Lake. King Valley is a different area up the northeast of Australia. So we're talking about King Lake here. But the fire that devastated Marysville started at the Murrindindi Mill. So that was a separate fire. And I guess there was a degree of complacency in Marysville anyway, because back in 1939, when the 39 fires came through, it actually split. The fire kind of split and went around Marysville. And I think at that time, only one house in Marysville was burnt down. So I think there was a fairly high degree of complacency that Marysville wouldn't burn. But part of the problem in terms of the severity of the life lost in Marysville, about 36 people lost their lives in Marysville and Narberthong, was simply because we didn't have any warning. And when the chap in the fire tower adjacent to Marysville contacted the authorities in Alexandra to say that there was a monstrous fire on its way that was going to kill people, they didn't believe him and thought he must have been exaggerating, and so didn't issue a warning until it was too late. So lots of errors made on that day, and lots of errors that cost people their lives.
So Marysville, that bill obviously being rebuilt. Was it built differently, or the layout, or the parks, or the tree lines? That was there uh, precautions put in place before the rebuilding, and what's it look like now, or when you
Well,
left?
the short answer to that is no. Yes, Marysville has been mostly rebuilt. Lots of new corrugated iron buildings that have all been built to the new bushfire attack level codes. But at the end of the day, the bush has all grown back and still surrounds Marysville. And really, if we had another Black Saturday come through, which is likely to happen again sometime in the future, exactly the same thing would happen all over again. So there really hasn't been any effective change at all.
Now, I've always wondered when the Dandenongs are going to go up places like Sassafras, Monbulk, and those places, because they're a disaster waiting to happen sometime or other, but they've been fairly lucky. I think there's only, going back to the 90s, they had a fire through there. I think there was 3 lives lost, but they've been pretty lucky. But the other problem with the Dandenongs is basically once you're in there and anyone wants to leave at the same time, well, you're not going to get very far because it's pretty ordinary sort of narrow roads, and there's got to be a lot of congestion. So I sort of always fearful about the Dandenongs.
Well, there's many places like that to the east of Melbourne. The Warburton Valley would be exactly the same. Masses and masses of thick bush and very few roads in or out. So if there were a firestorm to go through any of those areas, there would be thousands of dead people. And the management plan, I think, for that whole scenario is called wishful thinking. People just hope that it never happens because if it does, it would be a disaster of immense proportions.
Oh, I wish Marysville all the best for the future, and also the people in Dandenong. I hope they all keep safe, especially with another summit coming up. But I um, came across your interview with Peter Credlin the other week, and that's why I contacted you. Can you give us a bit of a rundown how you got involved in regards to you were picked up in regards to the Sky News segment?
Well, certainly, if we go back a bit, when you mentioned earlier about having a bit of a mixed career, apart from not really being able to sit still for too long, the whole progression from youth work to social work to community development to lobbyist to being an activist has been a bit of a lifelong journey, really. And part of that journey more recently has been involved in fighting against the so-called proposed Great Forest National Park. This is a proposal that's been on the books now since, well, going back quite a few years, 2015, 2016. And the proposal is actually to convert around about 300,000 hectares, I think, off the top of my head, of the Central Highlands, stretching right through that Marysville area and further east, into a national park. Now, of course, if it becomes a national park, it'll be closed off to so many people. Tracks will be closed. Activities will be banned. Local businesses will suffer, despite the claims of the environmentalists. And what we've discovered is really happening as a part of all this now, with the Victorian government in particular, their obsession, but also the federal government's obsession with handing land back to Aboriginal corporations. So the plan, and it's been going on now for some years, is to hand back a lot of public land, national parks, state parks, reserves, to Aboriginal organisations. Now, of course, these Aboriginal organisations, in fact, are simply private corporations that are run for the benefit of their members, and of course, only Aboriginal people are allowed to be members. So myself and many other people who think the way that I do don't agree, firstly, that these areas should be converted into national parks and activities stopped and people locked out of them. And secondly, we don't agree with the fact that this public land should be handed over in freehold title to what are essentially private Aboriginal corporations. So in relation to the Credlin interview, I write from time to time for Quadrant Online, and I was at a Quadrant function a few weeks back, and I met Peter Credlin, and we got to talking, and she was quite interested in what's going on here in Victoria, and I don't know that she was actually familiar with the detail of what's happening here. So she invited me onto her program, which was great, because what I'm trying to do is wake people up to the fact that what we currently know as public land is very likely soon to become private land owned by private corporations. Now, we could also talk about the nature positive plan, but we'll probably get onto that soon.
I'll just put a share up at the moment. come up? Can you see that?
Yep, there we are.
Well, that big area in red, is that the area you're talking about?
It is indeed. So hopefully your viewers there will be able to see that map. There's a little pink area just to the left of where your arrow is. That area
Yep.
is that's the Wombat State Forest, Lerderderg State Park, and Mount Cole, Mount Buanga areas. Now they're slated to become national parks in the very near future. Despite the fact that our Premier Jacinta Allen said that she promised not to put any padlocks on our public land. It's quite clear that the Victorian government is about to introduce legislation. It probably won't be until next year now, thank goodness, to gazette all those new national parks there. And of course, those national parks will then be handed over to the Dja Dja Wurrung Aboriginal Corporation. So moving to the right there, yes, that red area is the area that's roughly the proposed Great Forest National Park. So all of that area in there that's state forest will become national park, which will certainly affect what people are able to do in those areas. And that's currently under investigation, as the government likes to call it, by an organisation called the Eminent Panel for Community Engagement, which is basically 5 people that have been handpicked by government to tell the government what they want to hear. Now, the other much larger area circled in orange there, which basically covers the entire eastern half of Victoria, is currently subject to another investigation being carried out by the so-called Great Outdoors Task Force. Now, these groups have been allocated over $11 million. That's a lot of money to do these investigations to determine what the government should do with that land. And this has all been sparked by the fact that that the government closed down our timber industry, which was completely outrageous. It should never have happened. And now the government and the Greens in particular are going to work on how to divide up all that land and turn it into national parks and reserves and conservation areas, which basically just means that it'll largely be locked up. Blackberries, Scotch thistles, English broom will continue to spread madly. Feral animals, dogs, cats will continue to eat our wildlife. There'll basically be no management occurring in there at all because the government can't afford the staff to look after it. And basically all we need to do is wait for the next wildfire to come through and burn down the lot of it. I don't think that's conservation, and I don't think that that's effective management by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, the whole point is they're not interested in management. I mean, the government, state government land in particular, has always probably been your worst neighbour in regards to land management and basically feral animals, living in there quite happily and just coming onto other properties and that. There's no treatment of noxious weeds, and the thing is, when they lock up all this stuff, it doesn't generate any income. If you don't generate any income, well, then you can't look after it. So it's just a snowballing effect. You're talking about locking up almost half the state there. So you're denying it the ability to create wealth, to provide for employment and revenue raising that supports schools, roads, and building. And to me, what it looks like, it's just a regression. And and it sort of beggars belief in this day and age, we want to sort of regress rather than make progress. And like you said, the actions to lock up a sustainable timber industry was crazy. But Dan, not to be outdone by Mr. McGowan, the Emperor McGowan in West Australia, locking up the southwest of WA to forestry. He accelerated the closure. But the thing is, all that happens is, there's no development in it. There's no management. There's no people in there that sort of can support fire retardation or fighting bushfires or keeping access roads available. So all it's going to become, like you say, it's just going to be a fuel farm for the next bushfire.
Well, basically, Bill, what you're saying is that they sterilise the land. It becomes completely sterilised. Nobody can really do anything in there. Most of the access tracks are closed, locked up, and it's only a small matter of time then that all the trees and the bush comes and grows in over the tracks, and the tracks eventually disappear. I think the only people who are probably able to make any money out of land utilisation there are beekeepers, who in some instances are still allowed to have their hives in some of these parks. But for everybody else, it's game over. And of course, one of the amazing things is that firewood collection, of course, is no longer allowed in so many of these places. So all the firewood is just left to rot and later to burn. It was only 20 years or so ago that we could quite happily go and collect firewood in state forests, and it was no big deal. But now, if you take any forest firewood, then it's almost a $10,000 fine or a year in jail, plus the confiscation of all your equipment. So this locking up and sterilising of our land is basically insane. There's just no sense to it at all.
But it's even worse than that. From what I can gather, you're not allowed to disturb anything. So, if you take your children for a walk in these areas where you're still allowed to go, uh, they're really not even allowed to pick up a rock and skim it across the water because that's disturbing the environment. You're not allowed to climb over or climb over a rock to get a better point of elevation, sort of thing. It's like walk
Well,
here and don't touch.
there's a couple of problems with that. I mean, even in some areas now, because of supposed Aboriginal cultural restrictions, you're not even allowed to take photographs. But this is all part of this new age Gaia religion, this green religion that the Earth somehow or other was in pristine fashion, and it's up to us to return it to its pristine fashion and never disturb it again. Now, this is in fact a religious belief, and it's an insane religious belief. And of course, like so many religious beliefs, it bears no resemblance to reality at all. So the idea that we can just preserve things by never touching them again even defies the laws of entropy. Actually, it's just it makes no sense at all. But it's a religious fanaticism. That's where it comes from.
Firstly, it sort of didn't sound that all grievous when there was just it was an odd thing here and there, but now it seems to be a really concerted effort right across the nation, and it seems to me to be a little bit coordinated. It's the federal government's got an overview of it, and the state governments are participating in their own way. They're weaponised environmental law, and in recent years they've weaponised Aboriginal culture and heritage situations, and they're all seen to have the one goal, and that is drive us off the land, make it difficult as possible for people currently earning a living on the land to continue their activities. We've seen that with environmental things like water flow and things like that. We've got greater restrictions on the Murray-Darling irrigation system, where it's getting to a stage where we've got to have so much outflow to the southern lakes that there's little left for communities and agriculture and that. Then like you say, we've got this coordinated plan across Australia to identify land and allow people like conservation groups to buy private land and then just lock it up and walk away with no requirements to manage it. Then you've got situations where the government is actually actively engaging to buy land off graziers and that, where they've been put in difficult situations that where they can find it difficult for someone to buy their property, mainly because it's the regulations on farmers and graziers is so difficult these days. It's not a very attractive as it used to be. So they're taking the opportunities to buy up plots of former grazing land and that. And in Queensland, they call it protected parks areas. Basically, what it is, they just get huge swathes of former grazing land and farms, uh, pull it into one big property, uh, put the protection over it. Then they start actually demolishing all the infrastructure that was built up over the past 100 years in some events. They'll pull out all the fencing, they'll take out all the water points, they'll bulldoze the outbuildings, and if the homesteads aren't up to standard, they'll even bulldoze them and then walk away. If you've had land that's been managed under agricultural grazing conditions, it's not going to go back to some pristine sort of thing. It's already been compromised to a degree. So if you're not going to manage it, it's just going to flare up into its own way. It will take on whatever noxious weeds or whatever's around the place and just run away unabated.
Well, with apologies to Kath and Kim, Bill, I've got one word to say to you, and that's socialism. And it's socialism combined with New Age religion. So when you get the two combining, we get the sort of thing that's exactly what you've just described. So the whole socialist element, of course, is all about control, big brother, big government taking control of people's lives and interfering and telling them what to do, what they can and can't do. So these bureaucracies just seem to be inventing a never-ending stream of laws, regulations, and hoops for landowners to jump through. So much so that their land is no longer their own, and all of this is based on this New Age religious view of this pristine environment that we're supposed to be maintaining or recreating. And of course, both of them are just extremely bad for business. They're extremely bad for people.
But it's extremely bad for the country. I mean, my position is the land of the country should provide a dividend to all Australians. Now, that a dividend doesn't necessarily have to equate to direct monetary value. It can it can be amenity, like just a place where people can go and enjoy themselves. Um, you can have places that of high value where you do protect them and control the access to them to a degree to keep them in a pristine situation. But we've just gone sort of nuts and locking up everything. But like I say, it seems to be a two-pronged attack. It's the environment and also Indigenous heritage that are being weaponised. But when you look at what the bureaucrats are doing, it seems to be much more excessive or zealous than what even the foreign UN treaties and that were signed up to. It seems that because we're signed up to some different agreements, the politicians have just let the bureaucrats run wild and come up with legislation and regulations far more zealous than what it probably was ever intended by the authors of those treaties. But the politicians are so useless, they don't hold their bureaucrats to account.
Well, I think there's no question now, Bill, that the bureaucrats are actually running the country, not the politicians. I think that's been the case for quite some years. And I think all this Aboriginal cultural heritage, cultural awareness stuff is simply a Trojan horse for the other two things that I mentioned earlier, socialism and the New Age religion. So cultural heritage is being used very effectively now to to stop development, as we've seen with gold mines and other projects, and is also being used to keep people out of land. And surely part of the thing that the socialists are seeking to do is to corral people into the cities, the 15-minute cities or whatever they might be, where people can be monitored. Because the last thing a controlling socialist government wants to do is to have people roaming around in the bush, doing all kinds of things that the government can't monitor. So I think this very insidious aspect to that has been going on ever since the 1980s. So not good for people at all.
But it's also both sides of politics. I mean, a lot of people will sort of point the finger at Labor governments and things like that. But the Liberals have been pretty complicit in some of these things. I mean, if you go back to the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act that came through the UN, or was worked through the UN in the 80s, then advanced, and then eventually I think Howard signed up to it in the early 90s or something like that, and it's become an overarching policy developments by Canberra bureaucrats passed down to the states, and then they've done their bit on it. But so we have any sort of hope in regards to one side or the other, or another side of politics sort of pushing back on it? Because I don't really see it.
Well, many of us are extremely disappointed in the Liberal and National parties. We had a Liberal National coalition government for 9 years, and without question, they failed to act on many of the things that they should have acted on. And we've seen for years that they've just been Labor light, basically. And I could probably name quite a few members of both the Liberal and National parties at the federal and state level who would be just as happy being in the Labor Party, I'm sure. So we've got a very real problem there, because as long as these so-called conservatives fail to stand up for conservative values, then Australia will just continue to go down the drain. What I think we really need here in Australia, at federal and state levels, are some Donald Trumps, some people who are prepared to stand up for people, because it's a long time, I think, since politicians have actually represented the people and carried out the will of the people in the parliament. And I think you're exactly right when you say that they just sit back these days and let the bureaucrats do what they like. In fact, I have an example going back a couple of years of speaking to my local state member of parliament and asking her about some of the roads issues that we've got here. And you're probably aware that our rural roads in Victoria are just in appalling condition. They've never been so bad. Some of the potholes are absolutely life-threatening. And when I spoke to this member of parliament about why the politicians are not forcing the bureaucrats to do something about it, she simply said to me, they don't take any notice of us. They just make their own decisions and do what they want. And it's like, well, seriously, have the politicians actually abdicated their responsibility to just be pushed around by the bureaucrats? And of course, we're seeing that very clearly these days in local government, where councillors are actually almost irrelevant, and it's the council staff, the bureaucrats, and often the council CEO who make all the decisions and tell the councillors what they're going to agree to. So I think that our democratic system and our two-party preferred level of federal government and state government are very unhealthy, and there needs to be some changes, because I can see some very real conflicts happening in the near future.
But I also think that Australians deserve exactly what they get, because Australians are basically politically illiterate. They're apathetic, and they only get engaged when it's their hip pocket. I mean, anyone who's been watching the gradual destruction of our energy security, you know, anyone with a bit of common sense would say, well, destroying your energy security isn't a good idea, and basically it's going to impact on your national security as well. But we've gone down this road because so many people have bought into this climate change thing that everything's got to be done to somehow control the climate, and we can control the climate by cutting carbon dioxide emissions. Well, we can do that. It also, if we stop breathing, that's another way to end carbon dioxide emissions too. But we're not going to do that. But well, how have we got to this stage where we seem to accept so much dribble, or at least not even question it?
Well, again, Bill, you raised lots of issues there. I think electorally, the people of Australia and at state level as well have been disenfranchised for quite some time. We have a compulsory voting system, which I think is great, but the side effect of that has been that we've ended up with a majority of what I call footy team voters. They've had their same footy team that they vote for, either Labor or Liberal, for most of their lives, and they rarely change their mind. So we've got, say 80% footy team voters who always vote the same way, and then we've got the so-called swinging voters who that last 20-25% who generally swing an election one way or another. But I think and we've seen that going on, in Australia now for 100 years almost. But what we've got now is that things are becoming to such a crisis point, and I think that everybody's starting to realise now that our governments have made such a mess of things, and this has certainly become very clear under the Albanese government, that they've actually made such a mess of everything, especially our power grid, that people are starting to really wake up, because it's actually affecting everybody. I mean, I don't know that people really realise that the cost of power, which has gone up, I think, roughly about 25% for most people, the cost of power, of course, has a flow-on effect to absolutely everything, whether it's baking, whether it's transport, whether it's anything at all. So, of course, everything's going to go up in price. And, of course, everybody's standard of living is going to come down. So the fact that this bloke, if I can say on public, this moron Chris Bowen, who absolutely hasn't got an idea what he's doing at all, is actually totally destroying our electricity grid, and that's now being felt by people who are farmers who are having transmission lines, unnecessary transmission lines, I might add, built and put through their properties. It's starting to affect more and more people. More and more people are starting to wake up, and I hope that more and more people start to rise up. And just an addition on that whole business about transmission lines. Okay, let's accept the fact that coal-fired power stations come to the end of their life and may need to be demolished. But let's just build new coal-fired power stations, efficient ones with clean coal, or gas-fired power stations, or nuclear power plants on exactly the same site, and use exactly the same transmission lines, and we don't need to build any more new transmission lines. So this whole business of constructing lots and lots of micro inefficient power plants that are run off sun and wind all over different parts of the country, and absolutely destroying farmland and bushland in the process, is absolutely insane. I mean, no sane, rational person could understand or believe that this is actually happening at all. And nuclear power should have been constructed and operational in Australia well over 10 to 20 years ago. And the fact that it isn't is a total indictment on the federal government at every level and in every party.
Well, that's quite interesting, because it was Howard, as part of the agreement, I think, back in about 97, so he could get the sale of Telstra through. Or before that,
but isn't that interesting, Bill?
He signed the death warrant for nuclear.
but isn't that the point that these politicians can do this horse trading just to get something else through, which in actual fact has enormous ramifications for the rest of the country for a very, very long time. And that's what these creeps like Bowen don't seem to understand, is the fact that what they're doing by way of destroying the country at the moment is going to have ramifications and cost this country dearly for decades and decades. And the same thing is true of their immigration policy, that they've allowed so many people who are not prepared to fit in with our Australian way of life and don't hold our values to come to this country. And we had this myth of multiculturalism, that we were the most successful multicultural country in the world. Well, I tell you what, in the last 12 months, how's that turned out for us? Not very good, and it's not looking good for the future either.
I think those sort of things work when the economy is running well and everyone's sort of well off. But when you start to come into hard times and that, the focus certainly shifts. But just going back there to the footy teams for for political voting and that, my position in regards to people's apathy is, all right, you can vote, and be a long-term voter for a political party, but the thing is, you need to be aware and get yourself in the mindset in regards to, does the party and the candidates they're putting up still represent the values of the party you're thinking you're voting for? Because I can tell you that there's plenty of candidates coming up in this federal election that's, for the LNP up here, or the Liberal Party, as more people sort of look at them in this field of federal parliament nationals and liberals. But those people are from minority backgrounds that really have a big problem, that they really are focused on the wider Australian community. So unless you actually engage in, if you believe in a party, well, you should at least go and be a member, go to your local branch and shape it to make sure it's keeping to its core principle. Because the biggest thing I think with the Liberal Party in particular, and on the Labor Party, they don't hold to the principles that they did maybe 30 years ago. They're all over the place, and they go on a whim for different things.
Oh, look, I think that's perfectly true, very true. And look, I don't blame the people, if you like, the electors, the voters out there, for being disinterested and being footy team voters, because the whole business is very dispiriting, and it's a lot easier for the good old Aussie to just whinge and whine and complain, and that's part of the Aussie way. But to be fair, these people have got lives to live. They've got families. They've got kids to feed and educate. They've got mortgages to pay, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of people, I think, are just so busy with the task of living that they don't necessarily have the time to consider a lot of these things. So I don't necessarily hold that against them. I mean, I truly blame the politicians themselves for failing to stand up for the best interests of Australia and Australians. I mean, we can't expect every Australian in the country to tell our politicians personally what we need. I mean, politicians are supposed to be politicians because they know and understand what's best for the country, but they're not doing it. But that said, I thoroughly agree with you that people should get down to their local political party, whichever political party they favour, join up, become active, have your say in policy, and become involved, and write to your local member of parliament, visit your local member of parliament, and tell them that you are not happy and what you expect them to be doing on your behalf. It's imperative that people start to participate in the political process in that way and get active.
Yeah, well, you only need 100 to 200 people to be actively engaged with a branch, and you probably will get a better sampling of the wants of the community. But I know, I mean, the last time I went to back before Abbott was stabbed in the back, I actually lived in Ballarat and was a member of the Liberal Party there, and it was basically I was strapped out to get between 10 and 12 people there, and they were pretty old when I was there, and they obviously get older. But I mean, unless a branch has got somewhere around about the 100 to 200 mark of people actively engaged, it doesn't really reflect the community. That's I think is the
Well,
biggest problem. So we
in
don't
many
need a big percentage of people to do it. We just need a reasonable number. That's all.
Well, in many places, the branches and the branch structure are collapsing. It's only in the cities, I guess, to some extent that they're large. But in the country, I know that the local Liberal Party branch around here folded up years ago. I went to a Liberal Party meeting in one of the local towns nearby, where the nearest Liberal Party branch actually is, and probably the average age there was 75 to 80. There was one young person who came along to the meeting who I think came along because he was doing a school assignment on political parties. Um, so very, very disappointing. And we are going to have to see a lot more people getting active. But even activity now is taking a different form. I mean, I know a number of young people these days who are extremely active in social media. I know, for example, that one young woman created a Facebook page called the Victorians Against the Great Forest National Park back in May this year, after she attended one of the appalling so-called consultation meetings held by the government. And so she decided to get active, never been politically active before in her life. And that particular Facebook page now has got nearly 20,000 followers. So there's a lot of people getting active. I've personally been involved in a number of rallies that we've held over the last few months, and I think the old days of having soapbox rallies, town hall meetings, people getting out and getting active really do have a place in our modern political discourse, along with social media and effective use of blog programs such as yours and Facebook pages, Twitter, X, Instagram, and all those other things that I don't know very much about. But I know that young people can use them very effectively, and I think if those young people can get politically organised, we're likely to see some good change.
Well, there's so many groups around. If you look at the rollout of renewables, it's just about affected just every regional community around in New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland. For every renewables project, there's a Facebook page of people trying to stop it. And then now with this system where they're locking up more and more land. Obviously, there's more and more groups getting involved and interfacing with each other. You've got the Save the Summits groups. You've got the Mount Warring group, and it just goes on and on. But yes, they're individually doing things on Facebook and things, but somewhere along they actually have to have a physical mass or something, or coming together to actually get noticed. I mean, these politicians don't take any notice until they're actually threatened at the ballot box. And this is where all this sort of stuff's got to get coordinated. That people just come together through these and organise themselves, and then start running programs to say, well, we're going to look at candidates, and we're going to do our level best to make sure the candidates that are implementing all these programs that are affecting us adversely, we're going to do our level best to ensure that they don't get elected. And whether that means you don't even support the Labor or the Liberal, you support some independent or individual for an election, but it has to threaten politicians at at the ballot box, or else they really not going to take any notice. I think that's one of the
I think,
biggest problems.
well, I think the main problem with that is that, as you say, a lot of these politicians don't actually start to feel threatened, or don't actually start to do anything until people start rising up against them. And really, if you think about it, that should never happen, because the politicians should actually be out there representing the people, knowing what the people want and think, and adhering to those values and representing those people. But part of the problem now, though, is that we're now entering into a period in Australia that I'd call the Great Divide, where you've got all the well, not all of them, but a lot of younger people who have been well and truly indoctrinated. We all know about the long march through the institutions of the socialists taking over everything and converting everything into woke propaganda. So you've got all these indoctrinated young people coming through, and on the other hand, you've got all the older folk, the 40, 45 plus, who actually now understand how the world really does work, and have conservative values. And those two groups are really starting to clash. So it becomes very difficult even for politicians to actually keep a balance between the two of them, because you've got these two warring parties. And what this speaks to is the lack of homogeneity between or within our culture now, because it's been split in half by the socialists. So this is going to be a very, very real challenge for us in the future, I think.
But I think the issue is with the politicians. They're supposed to have certain principles for the betterment of the country. I mean, you can't believe that they're implementing more logging, sustainable logging that's been going on for 100 years. I think, well, we're doing that because it's good for carbon or the environment or global warming or something, but they're they're getting into this situation where they're enabling things that adversely impact on our economy and our wealth. And what's even worse, when you look at the recent history in West Australia and Tasmania, the government's actually funded activists to take them to court and make life difficult for the government to support the ongoing logging and that. So when you've got governments that are funding people to cause harm to the nation, I think they lost the plot.
Well, totally. And you've only got to look at the Environmental Defenders or the Environment Defenders Office, the EDO, that the federal government and some state governments fund to millions of dollars a year. And the role of the Environment Defenders Office is to take organisations, businesses to court to try and stop them from carrying out business projects for the advancement of Australia. And along with that as well, you've got a situation where you've got migrants or alleged asylum seekers who are paid by the federal government again to engage lawyers to fight their deportation. I mean, Australia is doing so many utterly insane, contradictory things. I mean, seriously, if you wanted to write a book about how to destroy a country and how to run an absolute shit show of an organisation, excuse the French, you've only got to look no further than Australia, because every aspect that you look at is just appalling.
I think one thing that's sort of interesting is that Environmental Defenders Office, some people sort of, hear that and they think, oh, it must be sort of semi-government or something. But it's bloody an arm of the conservation movement. They've labelled themselves as that. And so basically what the government is doing is funding conservation activists to weaponise legislation against its people and its industries. It's mind-boggling that politicians could allow this to happen. That you fund people who are actually attempting to destroy the livelihoods of other Australians.
Mm. Yeah, and that's just going on in so many areas. I mean, I might just mention the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the UNDRIP, and if any of your viewers haven't had a look at that, they should download it and look at it. A lot of what's occurring here in Victoria and certainly nationally is based on this absurd document, which I might add that one of the Labor Party senators was Mick Dodson, I think it was a co-author of, and it's a thoroughly unrealistic document, and any state or country that tried to implement it in full would simply go broke. But what that document requires, and Australia signed up to that in 2009 with Kevin Rudd, what that document requires is that states hand over ownership of all the land in Australia back to the Indigenous people. So that's got a lot to do with what's happening. So one of the things that any new Liberal national government should do, should they be successful next year, and we certainly hope that they are, is immediately unsign themselves from that United Nations document and start winding it back. So that's one of the many other declarations and documents that are holding this country back. We're doing so many things that are self-sabotaging that it's very difficult to see much of a positive future for Australia the way things are going.
The thing is, we might be a member of the UN, but we don't have to sign up to anything. We're a sovereign nation. If we choose to sign up, fair enough. But I don't see why we should sign up to anything, because as a sovereign nation with a reasonably good democratic history and being a good citizen of the nation, why do we have to? Why do we sign up to directors from outside? It's like, why do we have to sign up to the Refugee Convention? If we want to provide sanctuary for people in situation, we should lay out the framework for it, not be dictated by some convention. We're a mature enough country to make up our own mind. We don't have to abide by signing up to some convention or treaty, and then allowing our bureaucrats to go open slather on the implementation of those conditions in there. When we're not really obligated to it, we don't have to do it to the nth degree.
Well, there's two things on that, I think, Bill. Firstly, I think everybody's well aware by now that the UN is just another giant socialist organisation that's hell bent on control, and we certainly saw that through the COVID pandemic. And of course, the other thing about signing on to these conventions is that there's wheels within wheels, whether you want to call it blackmail or not. That there are certain benefits for signing up to a lot of these conventions, if it's money or if it's trade deals or other things. So there's a good deal of coercion that goes on behind the scenes for countries to sign up to these deals as well. So we might like to think that we're a sovereign country, but we're not really. We're an interdependent country that needs to work side by side along with other countries. But having said that, we shouldn't be selling ourselves short and going down that socialist line. But that's just what bureaucrats and socialists do. They like to have control over everybody. And that's the nature of the beast.
Well, just going back to the general topic of Victoria, and it seems to be leading the way in so many situations that I don't find envious. Your roads are crap in the regions. I actually saw someone put a post up in it, and someone had planted a garden in the middle of one of the roads because the pothole was so big. They thought they'd have a bit of a joke, and they planted flowers and they put in a sapling, and basically say, well, the road's not good for driving on, might as well turn it into a garden sort of thing, some regional road. But when's your election coming up? It's again.
Mhm.
Because you've replaced them with Jacinta Allen, but she hasn't been elected yet. She's still
Well, the
someone
very
who's been put there after Dan. So when are you due?
Yeah, the very sad thing is, Bill, not for another 2 years, not until November 2026. So we've unfortunately got another 2 years of this absolutely dreadful government. And of course, one of the things that they've just recently announced is their secret negotiations with the so-called First People's Assembly, which is simply a very unrepresentative, tiny group of people who identify as Aborigines who are going to negotiate in secret with the Victorian government about their list of demands for treaty and reparations. And no doubt this will involve the handing over of most of the state of Victoria, which is already in the process of happening, I might add. Their demands for a share of the resources, and I'm aware earlier this year that the Judge Arung Aboriginal Corporation is now receiving a substantial share of royalties out of the Fosterville gold mine, which amounts to millions and millions of dollars. The Twangarang Lands and Waters Corporation, I think it was in the 2019-2020 financial year, received over $65 million in cash grants and land and property and buildings from the Victorian state government. So this, well, and no doubt there will be dedicated seats in Parliament as well. Now, we've already seen New Zealand go down this road, and we've seen how it's actually destroyed New Zealand. And yet, Australia, in blind idiocy, and Victoria in particular, are going to follow down the same path. And somehow or other, that idiot Jacinta Allen is saying that this is going to make Victorians stronger, is along the path to reconciliation, and will make us more equal. Now, whether these people don't understand the meaning of those words, I don't know. But obviously, Jacinta Allen and the rest of her ministers are utterly, utterly out of touch with what the people of Victoria want. I mean, after all, we had one of the highest no votes in Australia to the Voice, which of course was just a Trojan horse for elite Aboriginal people taking over our government. That's another story. It just beggars belief the insanity that seems to be going on day after day in individual states around the country and federally. I mean, you wouldn't read about it seriously.
Well, I think the Indigenous groups don't really have to do much in the way of negotiation. I think that's just come into the office and say, well, what do you want?
Yep.
Because that's what it seems to me. Once you start doing this sort of stuff and speak behind closed doors, it's just a free for all sort of thing, um, and and the government is just too willing to hand over our property. And the thing is, it's all Australians people's property. Public land is all of our land. It belongs to all of us. You know, it shouldn't be siphoned off to different groups. But my way of thinking is that what you got as an opposition or a liberal group there
Mhm.
doesn't seem to foster any sort of feelings or confidence that anything is going to change under them anyway. There's nothing's going to get reverted once it's done. We're just going to be 97% of the people living in 3% of the land somewhere in the city, and the rest of it's going to be sold off by the corporations that become owners of the new land.
Well, I mean, this is all part of the problem, isn't it, Bill? We've got an opposition here in Victoria that's worse than useless. They're even lighter than Labor light. I think my own personal opinion is that there are far too many people there who are well past their best by date, and they should be moving aside and letting some other people have a go. We're just hearing nothing of any substance from the Victorian opposition at all. So that's a very great concern. And if they do win in 2 years' time, it'll only be by default because everybody's sick to death of the Labor people. So what you've also said is quite correct. But unfortunately, when a lot of these governments get into power, they don't actually roll back a lot of this stuff. Now, Victoria's got a particularly difficult issue with our state debt when we're paying $25 million a day in interest repayments. The overall debt's something like about $236 billion. Now, even if a new government comes to power, and of course, all the Labor people would just be quite happy to walk off the job once they lose the election. No accountability, no responsibility whatsoever. But how's the new incoming government expected to actually pay that off? So in terms of our new death duties here, our new land tax increases, all the other fees and charges that we're copping for fewer and fewer services, how are we supposed to pay off an immense debt like that, especially given the fact that there's nothing else left to sell? How is the new government going to be able to pay down a lot of that debt? So Victoria is going to be in serious, serious trouble for decades to come as a result of well, what will end up being nearly 10 years of Labor. What a horrifying thought.
But the thing is, you'll have no assets to use to create wealth like industry or anything like that, because you're giving away the land, you're giving away royalties that should have been going to the general revenue coffer to specific groups. So you'll have no revenue base to pay the debt. And the thing is, you certainly won't be attracting investment and industry to your state, because why would someone want to come in there when they've got several layers of bureaucracy hanging over them? So then they're never going to be profitable from the start. So they're not going to come. And then you go and don't even look at using the assets you got. You're locking them up, from gas to your timber. What's left to raise revenue from?
Well, businesses are leaving Victoria in droves, and obviously the timber industry's gone. So many industries are leaving because it's unaffordable here in Victoria, either going interstate or overseas. A friend of mine who worked for a gold exploration company as a geologist, he's recently been laid off or had to leave because that company is shutting down operations in Victoria. They're no longer going to be looking for gold here in Victoria because it's all just too hard, and they're actually moving to New Guinea. We even have a situation where the ban on fracking in Victoria has been written into Victoria's constitution. Can you believe it? This is the most anti-development, anti-progress state, and of course, if these parks go ahead, whether it be the Wombat State Forest, whether it be the Great Forest National Park, we have an enormous gold belt, one of the richest gold belts in the world, which ran from Jamison through to Walhalla, and that whole gold belt will actually be taken up as a part of the new Great Forest National Park. So that will mean no more gold exploration there, not even any prospecting, and obviously no new mines. So the anti-development and socialist new age religion perspective of the government and the bureaucrats that infest it is certainly going to be the economic doom of Victoria. It's just you can't believe how much they're actually destroying the place.
Well, I suppose it's a problem for everyone, really. But like I say, Victoria is definitely a petri dish of everything that's going to happen if we don't do something to start winding back some of these weaponised pieces of legislation and policy. But just before we finish, the groups that are around now, like the Save the Summit group and the people against the Great Forest and the climbers and all those sort of things. Do you think they can ever sort of find a way to throw themselves behind some other political group that might have gain a bit of ground and be able to push back? Because sometimes you don't have to actually win government. If you can get into a situation where you can get a third party up that can get in a position to hold the bounce of power, you do have some sort of chance of winding back this right. Do you get anything from the conversations from all these groups that they might be sort of prepared to sort of back an outsider in regards to a party to sort of at least get some of this thing wound back?
Look, it's complicated, Bill, and these things have been tried for decades. I've been involved in quite a few of them myself over the years. So yes, there are lots and lots of different groups, and they're all doing their part, and they're all trying to raise awareness. But at the same time, there's lots and lots of splinter parties as well. When we've got the Libertarian Party, we've got the Shooters, Fishers, and Farmers, we've got Pauline Hanson's One Nation, which of course surprises me a little because I thought that. Pauline was very popular in Queensland, and she's certainly known to be a truth teller. And yet, remarkably, One Nation didn't win one seat in Queensland. I found that quite a surprise. But in terms of everybody coming together, I think it's very unlikely that people will come together under the one banner. And of course, opposing us as well, we've got groups like the Animal Justice Party and the Marijuana Party. And all these other leftist, socialist, new agey kind of groups as well, and they're all doing deals. And of course, in the upper house, where the balance of power can be gained, then we've got this guy, our preference whisperer, who is happily in receipt of large amounts of money for people to pay him to work out their best preference deals. So that further complicates things down here in Victoria. So it ends up being a bit of Rafferty's rules, really, at the end of the day. I can't see any real solution to it. I think the best solution is for people to get involved in their local Liberal and National Party, to get vocal, to gain support, to come up with good policies, to stand for pre-election and get themselves elected. But that actually is a long-term plan. When you've got a federal election every 3 years or a state election every 4 years, if you miss out the first time and you want to go again the second time, it's a fair time to wait. And a lot of people are not really prepared to wait that long. There's a lot of work to do.
No, well, it seems that we're in for a difficult road, and there might be a little bit of spin-off from Trump happening in the United States, but all I can see is a squirming National and Liberal Party trying to redefine its direction because they've been wandering off course for a long time. But you talk about joining the Liberals and National, but really, a lot of people, should go and if they're Labor people, they should go and join the Labor Party as well because my background's from a Labor Party family historically, but we had traditional values. We didn't have all this progressive sort of stuff. So maybe people, even though Labor supporters, if they're more traditional based, they should be getting and joining back into the branches and that, and sort of bounce out their progressive people as well. So I think it's up to all Australians to sort of, if you don't like what's going on, well, then do something about it. And if it's political, well, then you just have to bite the bullet and join the party of your choosing, and just being active and try to get what trying to get through to them is what your values are and what your expectations are.
Yeah, look, I'd certainly agree with you there, Bill, in principle, and I certainly do the same thing. I encourage people to join their party of choice. I guess my own view is that I think that Labor and certainly the Greens are a bit of a lost cause at the moment. So, but if people feel as if they could get in there at the grassroots and have a difference to make Australia a better place in a more conservative manner rather than a socialist manner, then yep, good luck to them. I think they should do that.
Okay, then look, we'll leave it there. I'll just let you have the last word in regards to what you're doing over the coming months in regards to public awareness for all these different matters.
Well, thanks, Bill. I'm still actively involved in a whole range of issues. I have my own website that I'll put in a plug for. That's bartonbriefing.com.au. So I'm regularly posting up articles there and writing things for Quadrant online as well. I thoroughly recommend people read more of the articles on Quadrant online. The biggest task for me, I guess, in the new year is to start a campaign to ensure that the Albanese Labor government is tossed out in its entirety. No minority government for Albo. 2025 equals Albo's demise. We need a change of government. We need to make sure that they're a one-term government. Then I'll be working on trying to prevent the creation of any more national parks in Victoria, and certainly keeping a close eye on this treaty business, because Victorians are really going to have to stand up against whatever rubbish comes out of that treaty and whatever rubbish comes out of the so-called Europe Justice Commission that we haven't actually touched upon, but that's another blight on the Victorian landscape at the moment. And then, of course, we'll all be gearing up down the track to make sure that the Allan Labor government gets soundly defeated in 2026, and that the Liberal National Party grows some courage, shall we say, intestinal fortitude, to make sure that they actually start representing Victorians and start to be prepared to repair the mess that Victoria has become under that appalling Labor rule.
Okay, then, Dave, if you could just stay on the line, I'll just introduce next week's show.
Okay.
And we'll have a chat a little bit after. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week, we'll be doing our episode on Tuesday night, and my guest will be Daniel Hannigan. He's the owner of a firearms shop here in Cairns, and we're going to go through a brief in regards to what's required to get a weapons license in this day and age. And you'll get a bit of a view whether it's all too hard for you, or it's not that bad or not that onerous, that maybe you think, well, it's an activity that I might want to participate in. So join us next week on Tuesday when I have the guest Dan Hannigan. So thank you.